Salam Khawateen wa Hazrat, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of, or rather, a joint episode of Thought Behind Things and Beyond the Bubble. For those of you joining in from Thought Behind Things, आपको मैं थोड़ा सा बता दूं, I have started another podcast with the kind folks at Noodle Seed Studios, which is a phenomenal startup based in San Francisco. They're working on bringing MCP connectivity to the world. You can find out more about them in the description below. But चूंकि उनकी एक ग्लोबल ऑडियंस है और हम वहाँ पर जो है ना वो दुनिया में जो सबसे ज़्यादा कटिंग एज कमाल का काम कर रहे हैं स्टार्टअप्स बिजनेसेस एंटरप्राइजेस वर्किंग एक्सक्लूसिवली ऑन एआई एंड एज द नेम टेल्स यू एज वेल मेरा फंडामेंटल और फाउंडेशनल बिलीफ है कि we're in a financial bubble of AI, but the technology is so revolutionary that it is going to fundamentally change the way that our economies work, the way that we do business, the way even we live our lives. And therefore, that is exactly what we're trying to understand in this particular series. Beyond the financial bubble, where is the real value of AI? So I do apologize for people जो कि TBT वाले हैं. This conversation will exclusively be in English for the wider audience. But before I move on to that conversation, ज़ाहिर है आपने पहली दफ़ा सुना, मैंने पहले अनाउंस नहीं किया. Do check out the page, subscribe to it. Weekly उसमें हर Friday को एक episode आती है with some phenomenal guests. And if you want to find out more about AI की space में क्या चल रहा है, real world, noisy जो हर बंदा आता है और कहता है कि this new app came in and Hollywood is now dead. Beyond that, genuine real world use cases. We're exploring that. Check out the Noodle Seed page and follow Beyond the Bubble podcast as well. Today we have a very, very special guest with us. Special for two reasons. I've been meaning to have this conversation with him for a while now, not just pertaining to AI, but also pertaining to him as a Pakistani who's done phenomenally well, mashallah, in the big tech space. And interestingly, while not having a technical computer science background, with us we have today Hashim Syed, who is the AI GTM lead for startups in North America at Google. Previously, he was at Microsoft and Meta as well. Hashim, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Muzamil, and the entire crew for having me. It's truly an honor to be here, actually, with you. So I'm really excited to kick this
No,
off.
no, I'm glad. I'm gonna start off with just trying to get a bit of sense about you. Give me a quick background. Where are you from? What did you study? How did you land this particular position? And which is interesting for two reasons, right? It's a great position to have in terms of the title and the excitement, but you're at the right place at the cusp of this huge revolution, the next cycle, I would say. It's like being in 2005 6 and being GTM for, I don't know, cloud or mobile. We're now in this sort of AI cycle, and one would imagine people who gatekeep technology would be here. So how does one come about that? Tell me a bit about your background.
So I was born in London. I grew up there. I also lived in the Netherlands for a large part of my childhood, which gave me a really unique kind of international perspective. But I'm originally from Pakistan. I also spent a little bit of time in the Middle East, some time also in Pakistan, and deep cultural roots. So I would constantly go back and forth to Pakistan, but also Europe. And that also allowed me to really see, the impact that technology does have on the world and the unique aspect that it has for economic job creation, new startups, new ideas, and innovation. I was not technical. I studied politics, philosophy, economics at university. That came from wanting to learn more about the world. But I was always a bit of a builder at heart. And I hated this idea when I was a student that you need experience to get experience. So frustrated by, endless job applications, I started building my own consulting firm when I was a student, which led me to have incredible mentors and access to industry thought leaders. That led to my first internship at EY doing asset wealth management. At the time, I was being pushed into sort of the traditional career path to go be a banker. I did 10 weeks at JP Morgan. Realized I like sales, but I don't enjoy fixed income. So then I was like, I need to pivot out of this. And I rejected that, which again, if you come from a South Asian household or from Pakistan, that's a big thing, right? To turn down stability. But I went to Meta because I was like, at the time, I'm building my company through viral distribution and the importance of consumer intent. And I said, I want to learn more about this and be at the crux of technology. I spent some time in Meta. I started the UK's first VC startup growth program. From there, I got the itch to want to build again. So went to be a founding member, co-founder of a fitness app. We raised some institutional money in the UK. We led partnerships with, big companies like Deliveroo, KPMG, F45, etc. Learned a lot. We had a small little kind of exit from there. And then from there, went back into big tech at Microsoft, leading a sales team for financial services on so a completely different end of the spectrum. Great learnings there about people management and sitting inside of a bigger kind of tech environment. But again, that itch to want to build. So I left that again to go into Antler, be an entrepreneur in residence. That one didn't quite work out for different reasons, but got a good experience. And then now at Google, and I've been at Google for the last 4.5 years. Start off in London, leading our product strategy in the UK for search. From there, got selected for a special project in San Francisco. Started meeting a lot of founders. How are you guys using Gemini? What's happening in the startup ecosystem? Built, again, my own AI tools to, one, make friends in the SF ecosystem because people care about what you build and what you create. But also then we help start this new team that just does go-to-market for DeepMind, basically. So we're helping some of the most ambitious founders right now build and scale on Gemini.
Makes sense. You're in New York right now or San Francisco?
I'm in New York, but I travel a lot. So always back and forth.
Makes sense. The startup experiences that you had, I'm curious. Google has been able to retain you for 4 years. Is that the free meals or is that something different? Because you clearly are a man with an itch. I've had a lot of those conversations. It's very difficult to tie people like yourself down because the moment you're successful, it becomes redundant. And the moment it becomes redundant, it becomes boring. And so I'm curious, is that because the nature of the work is now so aggressive and the changes are so, the timeline of changes has become so slow that it's keeping you engaged? Or where's the headspace of Hashim right now, professionally?
Headspace of Hashim right now is, I'd say it's in two places. One, I love what I do. I feel it's one of the greatest privileges to be in this unique position where you're in a model lab, working model lab, and helping founders apply that technology and see how they apply it and scale with it, right? I'm talking from companies from C to Series A. And I think that's a great privilege, right? I've learned so much on that piece, but also I'm one of those that's always thinking about ideas and tinkering. And, for me, it's always been a case of, work hard and enjoy what you do and try and add value to the people and companies that you're in. I think in some near future, I will be back to iterating and building. I think that's always been me. That's how I learned. I was in San Francisco and I wanted to learn. I never knew what vibe coding was. I didn't have any friends when I moved to SF. So I built an AI agent for scheduling with the sole purpose just to be able to go to hackathon and say, hey, this is what I'm building. Will you try it? And that just allows you to have such new conversations with people. So I think for me, I'm always looking at what am I learning? What value can I add? And then I think hopefully soon as things start to calm down, I will be hopefully getting back into the, founder ecosystem space. But I'm also kind of open to exploring lots of different avenues, whether that's new sectors like applied and physical AI, or I'm talking a lot of VCs and investors these days. That's another interesting segment that excites me. So I always look at it and say, where can I learn the most? Where can I feel most uncomfortable? But where can I have the most disruptive impact as well?
Makes sense. Expanding the conversation a little bit. AI itself has gone through a lot of narrative ups and downs, right? So when it came out in mainstream came out in 22 to 23, initially it was very exciting and then quickly converted into this sort of doomsday situation of everybody's going to lose their jobs. We're going to have AGI by 2027. The world is going to change. And I feel like most recently now, we're going back to a bit of more cautious optimism, and the timelines have come back to reality. And so I'm curious, right, out there in the trenches, what's the narrative right now and how has the narrative evolved for you over the last couple of years from this is a new technology, go play with it, seemingly this is going to change the world, to, okay, 100 people are trying to play with it, 4 or 5 are genuinely onto something interesting and there's real value being created here. 95% are still exploring and that's fine. But, these are the 5 that we need to really sort of double down and work with.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think 3 things for me really stick out. There's an overarching theme that I call like the new rules of growth, right? In terms of how the playbook for go-to-market in particular, but also how company growth is being rewritten. If you think of the cloud era, companies had like 5 to 7 years to reach 100 million ARR, annual recurring revenue. in this AI native environment, you're seeing tools like Cursor, Replit, Lovable, and others reach that same scale in 5 to 7 months. So the time horizon that companies used to have to reach this, pinnacle for revenue has just been crunched. But at the same time, you have exceptional new technology, models, and tools that allow you to scale faster than truly ever. That's great. But that also leads to a second problem of that, it's never been easier to scale, but it's also never been hard. It's now more difficult to maybe perhaps differentiate yourself across a whole bunch of other applications in the world. And a couple of kind of key themes really pick out for me, and I think I see a lot with different startups that I'm working with, is that they focus on real activation over, let's say, fanfare or like, procurement sometimes. And what I mean by that is, anyone can build a viable app in an afternoon. But I love the phrase from Lovable that they say, you don't need a minimal viable product, you need a minimum lovable product. If your product has to solve for a very unique workflow and create a feeling amongst the users, whether that's consumers or enterprise customers using it, and really solve a problem beyond just, hey, I built an app, it does these three things. Great. I think anyone, anyone can do that. So you really have to solve for a problem, right? That's the first thing. I think second thing is that efficiency is now table stakes. Every startup, every enterprise company is focused on AI. They're looking at like productivity lifts, and I've helped so reduce the time it takes to build presentations and documents and all that, which is great. But the startups winning, and I think the enterprise companies really winning right now, are the ones thinking about how does AI not only do baseline productivity, but how do you get like new areas of growth? How do you really re-engineer and redesign end-to-end processes? And we can talk about this like through agent orchestrations and having a team of agents as opposed to just a team of just like humans and everything. And I think the third thing, which is going to be so top of mind this year, is that governance and education is the enabler. You cannot scale GTM without solving for things like shadow AI, bottoms-up learning, top-down enablement. Like we see Gemini Enterprise, which is Google's enterprise solution for AI in the workplace, now live in 90% of Fortune 100s. But one of the biggest questions we get asked is, how do we really help people on the ground build, learn, and enable themselves to be AI native and AI fluent?
Makes sense. I'll go back to your first point. You mentioned Cursor and Lovable and a bunch of these sort of tools. And I'm curious, is that the exception or is that the rule? And the reason why I mentioned this is because that's where the perception or the narrative gets a little muddy. Because a lot of these tools grew rapidly for a few reasons. They were riding a wave. And they inherently had to be dumbed down enough for them to grow so rapidly, right? So a lot of people are facing this problem where they're creating an app overnight, and the reason why it's being created overnight is because it tries to capture the lowest common denominator, does a few things that anyone, your grandmother, can do. And the fact of the matter is that if you can do it, a million other people can do it as well, right? Real value, more often than not, is customized, tailored to millions of different workflows, and that's where the timeline then goes back to where it used to be. And I feel like a lot of people right now, when they're looking at AI, they're thinking, the kid in the basement is thinking, I'm going to make the next Cursor, and I think that's the wrong goalpost, because I think if he is sitting there making $10,000 rather than targeting $60 billion, if he can target $50,000, there's value there. There's very real value there, right? So I'm curious now that the initial sort of frenzy has gone away, and we've stopped, because a lot of these apps were also AI workers selling to get rich quick in many ways. And that's a narrative thing. That's eventually going to subside. And eventually you're going to have real people working in real domains that is very exclusive and niche driven. And that may not have the total addressable market as huge as what a lot of these companies had. So run me through how a lot of these newer startups are looking at timelines and growth strategies compared, or are they still looking at just, Cursor did it, we're going to be doing that as well and become billionaires overnight?
Yeah, I think you have the whole spectrum, right? And there are a couple of outlier examples, and one top of mind for me is Emergent, another vibe coding tool that saw rocket growth, real differentiation in the market. Like they provide builders with AI agents that help them build faster. So as opposed to you just going in and talking through natural language about what you'd like to build or typing that through, you now have a team of your own agents enabled for you. But I think for me, like I see customers or like founders in two sort of buckets. And I'm going to steal this from Bessemer Venture Partners. They think of companies as twofold, right? You have like Supernovas, which are like your hypergrowth. They can reach like 40 million ARR in a year, then 200 million in year 2, year 3. But you also then have your shooting stars, who are more, like typical kind of SaaS companies. They hit 3 million ARR in the first year, then 12, then 40, then 50, etc. I think the most important thing, and when we work with a lot of our companies, what we're really trying to help them to do is build differentiated moats through the data that they have. Real clear workflow orchestration inside of the companies they're deploying in. And then third, very predictable and clear unit economics with tokens. So what we're trying to like sometimes pull companies back from is this like hype cycle that you have to get here in this amount of time. I think there's no rule for that. And I learned that also myself as a founder, right? When I was building my fitness app, it's called Magic Mountain, health and fitness app. Yes, we were raising money, but at the same time, I was like, I don't want to burn lots of money on ad dollars. I want to be very careful about how I go to market. And everything that I was doing with my go to market, I was, turning up at gyms, giving out flyers. I was trying to look for B2B partnerships, as opposed to just spending lots and lots of money just to acquire customers that maybe just shoot off. So I think the most important thing for these companies is to make sure that you have clear differentiated moats in your data and your orchestration. And then you're very clear on what models do we need for what. And I think in this realm where there's just so much change and hype, you see a lot of companies who go like this, but then just fall off. But the ones we're really trying to help and make sure is they just keep going up and they find clear ways to differentiate themselves or be acquired or have some success in that way.
No, that makes sense. I know that Google is working very aggressively on this across the world, including Pakistan. I saw that they're probably the only big tech company that's very actively working on the ground with communities, helping and supporting them in terms of not just educating them, but also helping them with the infrastructure to get started. And I'm curious if you have some thoughts on, for a lot of newcomers, what are the best ways to get into AI, and what are some of the areas that because I know for a fact, I'm sitting here in the US. It's very easy. The financial system supports it. Everything supports it. I do have the cushion to be able to utilize and do whatever. But for the average kid in Pakistan, who can probably do great for his communities, he doesn't have a credit card. Even if he has like a Sada Pay, like a debit card or whatever, somewhere he is always looking for, can I get something for free just to test it out? Can I actually create a proof of concept before I can actually scale that? And I know Google is big on that. So run me through some of what you guys provide to support communities.
Yeah, so there's two things that really come to my mind, right? Some of it has transpired from the work we've been doing here. A lot of big themes around, like a lot of the role is also working with companies on how they use models. But another thing we've been doing a lot is looking at how do companies embed AI in the workplace. And actually, what we've been doing recently with companies in Pakistan is looking at that. How do we bring safe and secure AI in the workplace? And we provide Gemini Enterprise. And that's a really great starting point because enterprise companies represent such a unique access point to do AI-wide enablement training and digitize and AI-fy almost how they operate. So we've been working with lots of different companies in Pakistan, through Gemini Enterprise, trainings, licenses, and last year in November, December, January this year, February, March, throughout the year, we've been leading like a fellowship specifically focused on that, where we've got Googlers all across the world from our Singapore teams as well, working with companies inside of Pakistan to help them do that. Second thing that comes a lot to mind is we recently ran AICCO, nationwide vibe coding competition focused on AI enablement. We trained almost up to 100,000 people through AI. Everybody was building vibe coding solutions from health tech, ed tech, fintech, etc. And the beautiful part of this that it's, like I said at the start, it's easy to start. And if you're looking at this saying, how do I get started in AI? And people, even when they join Google, they're like, there's so much to learn. How do I start? My advice is just talk to it. Just literally press the voice icon, describe who you are, what you do, and what you're stuck with, and ask it to teach you. like ask it to actually either build you an agent, like your onboarding agent, or second, walk you through what do you need to do, what do you need to be effective in your role. And as a non-technical person, that's exactly how I learned. I was like, what is vibe coding? What is an agent back at the start of 2025? And I was like, give me the steps to how do I build this? What prompts do I need to write? What system instructions do I need to give the model? What is an MCP server? And all this different type of stuff. So and really focus on the learning, because I think it's now, you can outsource intelligence, but you can't outsource understanding. So really be the person in the room also who is able to actually articulate what is actually happening and how do you build stuff. But specifically with Pakistan, we've been looking at kind of AI in the workplace. We have a whole range of startups also using, Gemini and Google for Startups and our credit program and that. And we've been running this vibe coding initiatives with the GDG guys and the Singapore teams, and also local partners inside the country as well.
Makes sense. You mentioned early on, technically startups and companies can automate workflows. That's a nice way of saying make current workers redundant and essentially save a lot on cost of services. Now, for a lot of the developing world, Pakistan, India, Philippines, they rely a lot on this services work that is redundant, back office, technical or non-technical work. And it seems like now, increasingly, that ship is sailing. And so I'm curious, are we sunsetting that era of offshore work or remote work? And is that entirely going to be replaced by agents? Or are we actually saying, listen, there was an entire industry around it which was working on low value, and we're now going to increasingly move higher on the value chain. And there is still opportunity, there is still money to be made, arguably more so, but it will depend on who reaches that place fastest and can upskill them to be ready for the post-AI world.
I think it's too hard to predict, honestly. And I think anyone that tries to, again, people have different experiences, but I think, so here's my take, right? So pre-internet age, there was no job of the social media manager or digital marketing. And in the 2000s, 2010s, that became one of the most prolific and sought after jobs. Whether you were buying ads, creating ads, storytelling, content designing, then you saw data science come in, measurement analytics, a whole new industry was born through the internet age. And I think we're going through that same shift now, particularly through AI, where you now have, I think there was like 1,000% year-over-year growth through AI-related roles. Now, you could argue that the baseline was 0, right? Now, that's not entirely true, because we did have machine learning engineers, we had computer science, we had software engineers already dabbling in this space for decades, right? We think of people like Jeffrey Hinton, for example, and like Demis Sabes from the early 2000s, 2010s, etc., and others. But, roles like AI augmented services of AI product managers, AI GTM, AI engineers, AI testers, like there's a whole new industry being built. And if you being built right now that needs people that have a technical base, and you think of markets again, like my own view on this, like you think of markets like Pakistan, for example, one of the world's, the world's third largest exporter of IT freelancers. That's a very unique market, and I would argue is in a better position to shift and become AI native than a market that's not technically native, right? Like the learning gap for a non-technical person to become, an AI builder versus somebody who has the technical skills to write code is much easier on the second run. Similarly, right, like you're still seeing a lot of these companies, again, prioritize and focus on the human skills. So you're seeing roles like storytellers. AI labs are hiring for storytellers or content managers. Because again, like this whole wave of, AI slop and different things being put out there where you need people who can actually really articulate, again, what is actually happening, where are the opportunities, and how do you, do things. I have a team of agents that I use to do my work, but it's still me sitting with a client, right? It's not my agent. That's even though I've trained an agent with my voice and my face to, speak like me and be like me, but it's still not me. And the client still wants to see me and the same way I want to see a client. So there are still unique elements of what we need to focus on human skills and just really turbocharge them with AI native skills and AI builders. So I'm right now still more optimistic about that than I am sort of, kind of doom about the industry. And I think it's just a constant need of change. Like my job didn't exist 3 years ago. I went and found that job. I went to go and understand what can I do, what can I build, and I think that's how we should be looking at this. Like, what are the new industries? What are the problems to be solved for? And let's figure out how do I actually apply my skills for that.
Makes sense. Um, there's a big debate going on right now in the AI space. There's obviously the geopolitics of it, the China versus US, but underneath that, that the whole geopolitical element, the conversation is right now being driven by open source versus closed source, frontier labs eating everybody's pie versus everybody just going crazy with AI. And I want to give the narrative of both sides just to keep it balanced. But frontier labs say it's such a powerful technology that eventually, if everybody has that with no guardrails, people are going to be creating bioweapons, people are going to be doing cyber attacks, it's going to become extremely difficult to control and or regulate this technology. The open source proponents then say that if you allow for this entire system to be controlled by a few people, first of all, that's too much power consolidated into too few hands. But also, if you truly want to create an accelerated world with the level of prosperity that we're dreaming of for AI to provide us, that can only happen when you democratize that technology. Because right now, at the current costs, the developed world is struggling to fund it. For developing, I think, barring a very small amount of people, majority cannot utilize that technology if, let's say, the open source world didn't exist. And to prove that point, I think, Anthropic recently had Fable 5 come out. They were like, oh, we'll give you this for a week. You'll get addicted to it, and then it's going to tokens. And then Kimi 3 came out. And then that going to API moved to, okay, we'll give you 50%. And then that 50% went to, okay, we'll give it to you for life. Just come to our, more expensive plan. But you can very clearly see them struggling to keep up. And that's where the prices are going down. That competition is really helping that industry, and all of us then benefit from it. That's my take on it. I'm curious about your opinion on closed source versus open source and the debate that surrounds it.
Yeah, it's a great, I think, question and topic right now. I think, look, so I don't think it's a zero sum like binary between open source and closed source. I think the world genuinely needs both, and it's important to distinguish where like like frontier model intelligence, whether it's Gemini or Claude or other frontier AI labs and LLMs, right? They're pushing the absolute ceiling of reasoning, multimodal context, and enterprise security. And you will still need those models to push for things, whether it's agentic coding, getting towards AGI, bringing in like new transformative ways, right? And I think, if you think of like Gemini even, it's one of the best models, if not the best one on the market for multimodality. And I think it's really important. That's something that I've always been inspired by from Demis and the DeepMind team in particular, that humans, the way we like speak and do work is not just text. We need a model that understands audio, video, speech, natural language, and that's what the Gemini family brings, right? So you need like the ability to push the boundaries for what is possible on intelligence, and then also be able to, fund it on the compute and the cost side and actually host that inference as well. But similarly, right, like we do, there has been a rise in the demand also from developers for these like open models that, democratize access, democratize development, allow founders to, fine tune locally, then efficiently run on-prem workloads. And, we see that. And I think that's a good thing, right? That these models are out there, these models are being used because, again, it pushes the levels of intelligence. And that's something that we've always tried to do, right? So we have Gemma. Gemma is our open source model from the Google ecosystem. It's a great model, highly widely used by a lot of developers. It's cheaper, it's fast. You can host it on your own servers, fine tune it, train it as you need, and then ship it. And what a lot of work actually that we're doing now with a lot of companies is thinking about like, how do you orchestrate that? Where do you bring in, I think like maybe the early days of AI it's like my model was almost like my bank. I'm with one model, one bank. But actually now you need to be thinking about like your entire workflow, your entire stack. Where are you using coding, transcription, OCR, speech to text, text to speech, whatever it might be. And what is the right model for that use case? And then we spend a lot of time actually evaluating that. And our focus really is giving builders access to both ends of the spectrum. So we have something called Agent Platform, the Model Garden. The Model Garden, it sits inside Agent Platform, formerly known as Vertex AI. You can access up to 200 plus models on that, whether it's frontier models, open source, closed source, whatever you like. And the real winner in this market will be the founder who builds the best workflow integration and product experience, sitting on top of the models. So I think for me, it's a really good thing that we do have both closed frontier models and open source models, and people are pushing towards that. And you're seeing a whole new debate, around that's going to open up on what is the right model for the right use case, as opposed to closed versus open. I think that's too closed. Not wrong use of word, but like too small in I think thinking.
Short-sighted. What's the angling here for Google, though? I mean, I understand, let's say, people tend to bring geopolitics into it. China is trying to undercut the US and trying to make their entire economic modeling around AI uncompetitive. But then you have, like, within the US, I think probably the only real player in open source is Google right now. Facebook tried with Llama. I think that never really caught on, as well as, let's say, Gemma did. But I'm curious, like, what's the economic model? What do they gain? Because even for Android being sort of semi-open source, you had the added advantage of building an ecosystem that eventually tied back to Google and allowed for Google to be able to grow, right? How does Gemma come into play when you have your own sort of Gemini series of models and nobody it's pretty ambiguous in terms of how does long-term AI gets monetized, whether it's through selling tokens, it's through apps on top of it, but I'm curious, what's the strategy there, or at least the publicly available strategy there?
Yeah, I think it's people see it as a contradiction to offer both Gemini and Gemma. But I would say, I think you touched on it slightly, it's the same strategy with Android, right? Like, I think AI is maybe, I don't think it's splitting into two worlds, but there are, again, like those two use cases between kind of open and closed. So one, think of like edge and customization, right? Developers want open weight models like Gemma. They want to run them locally on laptops or phones, lower in cost, and it keeps their data private. And that's appropriate. And that's the right place for that to be. So you have to service that. Second is, like enterprise cloud orchestration. These enterprise companies want frontier models that are safe, secure, guardrails in place, governance, and they can lift it off the shelf and implement it. Because again, like if you're a founder or you're a startup or an enterprise, everyone operates in a different domain of speciality. And I think you have to focus in that domain. And I think we've seen companies who've tried to do everything, hasn't always worked, right? But so enterprise companies, want heavy frontier models like Gemini for their multi-step reasoning, background agents, multimodal context, etc. So the world needs both for different use cases. And that's what, Google's strategy really is to be the hyperscaler that offers that. It's the same reason, for example, we're one of Anthropic's biggest partners, right? We have trained and run Anthropic on GPUs. And, for anyone that's an AI geek like me, if you go and look, let's say on Open Router, artificial intelligence analysis, you can see the speed of the Anthropic models through Google, through GCP, through Agent Platform, sometimes is faster than running it directly on Amazon or AWS. And that's because we want to be the hyperscaler that caters for the entire stack. Is interoperable, that you can build using whatever model, whatever technology you like on this, and just go to market. And that's always been a core philosophy, right? I think like when Sundar stepped on stage in 2016 at the Global IL conference and talked about AI, it was like this is 10 years ago. Nobody was really thinking about this back then. But we've always wanted to be, the company that caters for wherever you are in your journey. You can use this technology, you can use this. We want to be your partner of choice as you scale through the entire stack.
Makes sense.
And I think that's really valuable for every single person in this space.
I want to get a sense of, let's say, you've divided this into open source and then, let's say, closed source, Gemini series or Claude or ChatGPT. The way that I would, or rather, what I would like to channel from you is, where do you see this 10 years from now? And the context for this question is, recently we saw a rebellion happening within the US ecosystem, where it started off with, I would argue, the Palantir CEO talking about how sovereign AI is becoming very, very important. And, these sort of big companies are monopolizing that entire industry. Then Satya went on and shared this essay about the future of AI, and it has to be more equitable and shared growth. Like it was a phenomenal vision that everybody sort of echoed across the industry. Then we started to hear, I mean, obviously Kimi 3 came out and we started to hear a lot about, we need to ban open source. And so a bunch of other people then joined in. Most recently, yesterday, David Sachs and a bunch of other people wrote an open letter. And then literally Jensen from NVIDIA created an X account
Yeah,
to share a
some
poll.
of the models. Yeah,
And that was crazy because I can imagine Jensen's narrative here, because if you're on the hardware side of things, you need the entire ecosystem to fully utilize the power of AI, and so obviously there's incentive for him there. But then there are a lot of other players right now who are saying, okay, we need an open ecosystem and we need to have a competitive market. And the thing that they keep on mentioning is, at the end of the day, you have a couple of companies, and it's interesting because Google is right there somewhere in the middle, is somehow evading that narrative. You got the ChatGPT and Anthropic taking most of that brunt, but they're saying these companies that are using all these tokens, they're learning all of the workflows, and eventually are gonna sort of disrupt everybody, and that just cannot work out. And so you need more sovereign, independent, individual AI stacks for all these companies. And so I'm curious, where does that lead your frontier models like Gemini, first of all? And then tied to that, 10 years from now, do you see, because the way that I see it, I feel like, we in the early days of the internet, you were looking at things around you would look at internet on two numbers, the speed and the total amount of the bandwidth and the total amount of downloadable or uploadable, let's say MBs or GBs that were available. I feel like now it's very similar for tokens. And the way that I see it, I feel like when we're almost close to the point where a lot of our workflows are solvable by the current generation of models. And by and large, 10 years from now, AI will be free and unlimited, or not free and unlimited, but like a subscription, unlimited subscription, because the token cost would have gone down so much that it's virtually useless to actually sit down and sort of calculate and price that accordingly. Because previously, it was the whole industry was, every SaaS app, everything has to be token driven. There was a tokenomics thing that you had to build into every ecosystem, right?
yeah.
How do you see this ecosystem developing and growing in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the last piece, right? Like the tokenomics. The tokenomics piece is a big one, right? For us, we've seen a lot of customers. I think like a lot of customers love Gemini for its speed. Like if you think of think of a graph, you've got price to intelligence ratio. Like Gemini is always operated kind of in the middle, at the Pareto frontier of price to intelligence. And the models are built for speed. You think of how fast search is, like that's what's being factored into the Gemini 3.6 Flash models and future Flash models, but also Flashlight. And Flashlight is exceptionally on the cheaper end, right, of what you can get in token pricing. So, and the second thing then really comes up now with a lot of customers, irrespective of their startup, seed, Series A, or $1 trillion enterprise company, whatever it might be. Everyone is like the cost of tokens matters, and so that's where a lot of customers, I think, bottoms up went for more expensive frontier models. But now what's happened is they're realizing that you maybe don't need, let's say, a Fable to edit a deck, or create a document for you. So that's where we're spending, and I'm spending a lot of time with, like, let's say, companies at latter stages of their investment rounds, thinking about what is the right model for the right user, the right workflow, and the right use case. And that also really varies on what that company is and where they sit. So I think that's going to be more important. I think that's a good discussion to be having. And then the CIOs, the CAIOs, the CTOs, we're all looking at them and working with them to figure out, okay, what is like your overall then tokenomics, and how do we value max as opposed to token max? Like we need to align the right model to the right workflow and the right user. The second thing I think that, that I think that really comes in for me is you're realizing the importance now of of enterprise risk management. And I think enterprise risk management is important irrespective if you're like a large company or a small company. And, shadow AI was a big thing at the start of this year and continues to be. And for anyone that doesn't know, shadow AI is basically you're working at a company, but you're using AI tools in an unlicensed way. So you're effectively just kind of leaking your proprietary data out into these public-facing models. And that's where, again, Google has a really unique positioning that everything you do inside of our enterprise platform is your data, you own it, you control it. And more companies want that. Like they want protected environments for them to run AI workloads and for their employees to also interact with models, build agents, and build applications.
So do these models then work in a sandbox environment? And the reason why I ask this question is I know that at least one other company, every prompt, every conversation that you have goes right back to that company, and they're being able to train their models on that. And that's the biggest question right now, where enterprise is essentially training the models to disrupt themselves. And that's why people are beginning to rebel.
Yeah, so the simplest thing I do with any of my client, with any of my founder is if you're a developer and you're prototyping, you can use Google AI Studio to like just experiment. That's what I would use to like just build random applications and just have fun. If you're in your company environment, use the agent platform, or formerly known as Vertex AI Sandbox, but that's an enterprise grade environment where you can build, scale, govern AI ML workloads and AI agents, and that is your data, you own it, you control it, right? So that's the very first thing we do with all of our clients is what are you trying to do? So you make sure you route it to the right endpoint and right environment to protect yourself and protect your data. That's really important. I think similarly, you touched on something else, right? Is this idea that I think token cost is somewhat the agentic bottleneck, right? Like these multi-agent systems that companies are now deploying inside of their environments, running 24/7 consumes quadrillions of tokens. And like peak frontier models can be too expensive for those sub-agent tasks. So again, what becomes really interesting is like looking at, the same way that how would you build a human team? You'd have a manager, then you'd have maybe a couple of ICs underneath, and everyone specialized in different tasks. That's exactly the same thing that we are doing, and we should be doing more of with founders, with startups, with enterprise companies. Say, you need like the agent that builds the brain of your team. The model that serves the brain agent of your AI team is very different to the model that serves like the individual ICs or individual sub agents. And that's what we need to get to for that. Then I think on AGI, there's so much data out there that we don't have access to, right? And I think that's where like physical AI, robotics gets very interesting. And I think for me, I think that will be the new frontier in AI. And I think 2025, 2026 will be like vertical AI, really maximizing. As a vertical AI is just AI agents deployed for a very specific industry, whether it's finance, HR, law, etc. Now you're moving into this sort of era of AIOS. Like how do you connect disparate tools and disparate systems through an agentic operating system, like an agentic brain? And that will ultimately push towards physical AI, robotics. How do you deploy AI in factories, agricultural houses, farming, automotive, and this goes beyond just electric vehicles. This is real next level super intelligence, which I think is super exciting, right?
No, that makes sense. Coming to the, you mentioned like a roadmap of, let's say, Agent OS. I would even actually go back to the example of AI employees. I think what a lot of people miss is actually AI is very simple. It's data in, it's certain processing or decision, and then it's inside out, right? And if you can break it down into that and really understand what is the quality of data coming in, what is the quality of insight that's generated, then you can really begin to see what sort of AI do I really need. And more often than not, this is a very repeatable, redundant task. You don't think too deeply every single time a task is coming in. Now, my question to this is, while when you sit in San Francisco, and I keep on repeating this, I genuinely feel like San Francisco is on a different frequency right now because they're living in 2100 while the rest of the world is living in the 1800s right now. Even out here in Atlanta, southeast, even in the East Coast, barring New York, majority of the people that I speak to, they're like, oh yes, AI is great, we're using chats, but they're not really talking about agents, and they're not really talking about, they're still very, very complacent with what's going on.
Yeah.
And then you go out all the way to Asia and you go to Pakistan or India. I was speaking to an Indonesian founder last week, and very similar experiences. And it's largely because we're solving that, this very simple equation that I've built. The agent part is being solved. That's exciting. Everybody's talking about that. What model? What XYZ?
Yeah.
The fact is the data in layer just does not exist. It's because we never really thought about it. We had the whole IoT thing happening, but that was just trying to build the data in layer. There was no insight generation, so nobody really hopped onto it. And so I'm curious, how do you expect that problem to solve? Because if you remember, this is the AI transformation era. Right before this was the digital transformation era. And the digital transformation era is still ongoing in many, many parts of the world.
Yeah. Agreed.
So how do you sort of solve that data in problem? We're going to go to part 2 later, which is the world models and the more 360-degree. But even right now, without the robots and without much of the sci-fi, much of the world is stuck not because they don't have access to the frontier models or whatever models. They're stuck because they don't have the foundational layer that enables AI in the first place.
Yeah, there's one thought I think which really I read this really great book. I can't remember so actually there's I was trying to look for it. There's one great book I read on AI systems, but there's another one I'm reading now. It's called The New Rules of Geography by Mehran Gul. I highly recommend this one about anyone who's interested in kind of geopolitical risks of AI and where do we think AI is going with the world. But on its simplest nature, I think you touched on it, right? Where like artificial neurons basically just mimic biological neurons in the brain. So the way that AI systems work and operate through perception, reasoning, understanding, and output is very similar to how we as humans work. You see something, think about it, you try and understand it, and then you try and explain it. That's exactly the same as how these AI systems work. And all that changed was it went from kind of standard AI, which was just AI in search, to just generative AI, where AI starts thinking and learning on its own and able to produce new outputs. And that's the same kind of evolution that I think humans also go through. So I think for a lot of people, it's like, these are not scary systems, right? These are just systems that mimic us, were created by us. And you should use it as your kind of collaborative partner. The second piece then on the data layer for AI, there's a really famous stat out there about like how much of the world's data we've actually captured. And, I think common thought is to say we've captured nearly 100%, but it's actually significantly smaller of that data layer. But this is going to become, even more important, particularly as for two reasons. One, the importance of localizing AI to different markets, different cultures, and different languages. And you're seeing that come up, particularly through speech. Gemini Live, phenomenal model. If you haven't tried it, it's available in most languages around the world. I speak Urdu to it fluently, speaks Urdu fluently back to me as well. But you're seeing a whole new range of companies also pop up that are taking these models and fine-tuning and grounding it on local language nuances and linguistics and heuristics, etc., which is great, right? Like that's how you democratize more AI access to the world. Similarly, I think for the data layer, that will come through more of what we can capture more. It's like a chicken and egg, where you can either create new synthetic data to train these models, or you go out and capture it. And robotics and self-driving cars is a really interesting space for that, because as these cars are moving, like Waymos are moving, they're also like building new intelligence layers, new data layers to train the underlying models on, and then ultimately improve the intelligence of the car and the function. But I still think we are far removed from that. So I think the most important thing is making sure that we're making it safe and accessible for models to be acquiring the right data, so that one, you reduce bias in models, but two, then also improve the quality of output. And again, third, and I think this is really, really important, is anything that anyone says, I was taught in philosophy, you should question it, like critically analyze it and assess it. And that should still be the case with any output of any AI generated model, irrespective of which model it is. Because again, you have to understand it as opposed to just, hey, this looks good, copy paste, bang, done. Right.
Makes sense. I'm going to bring this towards a wrap. I try to keep my conversations within 60 minutes. But I want you to now take off your Google GTM hat and wear your original economics, policy, and politics hat, or law. I'm not sure the third. And I'm sure you do this activity. When you're done with the day's work, you're sometimes sitting there thinking, where is all of this going? And as I've mentioned before, you cited this book as well that shows that you clearly deeply think about
Yeah.
how do these things and this evolution impact us as a species, as a civilization, as humanity. And unfortunately, we do, for most people who are thinking about this, they do end up making the mistake of approaching it in an inherently tribal way. So, geopolitics inherently is tribal. I grow or that person grows or whatever. The fact is, when this sort of transformation is coming, yes, it has a lot of geopolitical impacts and regions change and power changes. But on a long enough horizon, it impacts humanity as a whole. If I really go on a foundational level, genuinely, again, I genuinely want to tap into your non Google hat. Where does AI take us 50 years from now?
Where does AI take us 50 years from now? I think, where does AI take us 50 years from now? I think I think the world, like honestly, even in 5 years from now, I think the world is going to look very different to what it looks right now. Autonomous vehicles, humanoids will be more prevalent in our life and in our personal life and in our work life. Whether that's, I've seen videos of humanoid nannies, helping babies and things. Is going to be brilliant. So I think we'll be much more surrounded by physical technology in our everyday operation. And you've seen that, right? Like slowly it starts to move. If you go back to Pakistan, how many houses right now are connected through, being able to turn lights on through the phone? Versus if you come to San Francisco, people are just talking. They enter the house and say, "Hey, hey Google," or something, and they're just talking to the house the same way they talk to a person. So I think physical AI is going to be much more embedded in our daily life and every single action of that. I think secondly, there's such a race. I personally feel there's such a race right now to train people up on technical skills, engineering, computer science, being AI agent orchestrators, knowing how to build an agent, showing it in your interviews and explaining explaining the whole technical aspect of it. But I think at the same time, what my fear is that we don't forget the human skills, and those are the durable skills, like human empathy, critical thinking, leadership, because that's what gives us taste, that's what gives us values, that's what gives us reasoning and purpose in life. And I think we need to be more human to really survive and thrive in an AI driven world, critically assessing what we see, what we hear, and being able to pass that on. And I think third, I think the biggest thing I say to a lot of people, and I say it to myself, is you just have to be highly adaptable. Where, again, I still consider myself relatively young. I've worked, continuously for coming up to maybe 8 years post my bachelor's. And I'm always thinking, what is the next thing? I have some ideas in physical AI that I'd like to explore. But when I was studying PPE, politics, philosophy, economics, learning about logic and reason and argument in my philosophy lectures, or studying Machiavelli, and I did not think I would be in AI in 8 years from that time. So I think you just have to be highly adaptable and just go back to where is the world going? What are the problems to solve for? Where can I add the biggest value, the biggest differentiation to that? And just focus on that. I think trying to predict everything of this is what's going to happen is great for a pitch deck, but you can't use it to fuel your own life philosophy, right? I think you have to like just constantly be thinking and like, what are the problems and what's going to happen and how do I solve for it? And again, there's a lot of spaces where AI is still at the infancy, right? You know, whether you think of like healthcare, financial services, like regulated industries that are pushing there. You know, I know we also talk about data centers in space, so you have like two different ends of the spectrum. I think be curious, just be a dog for detail, and just try and sniff out everything that's happening. See how does it align to your values and your life, and I think really just go after it.
If I were to expand on this, I think I'm hearing two major narratives. No, I'm hearing three major narratives right now
Mm.
out in the open. The first is driven by, like you mentioned, you having a philosophy background would not have imagined working in AI, because a lot of philosophy people that I see right now are the ones leading the charge against AI. Because if you really start to think about it and you're thinking with what you're with that philosophy background and you're looking at short to medium term, you're categorically seeing that disruption where disruption technological disruptions tend to incentivize and reward those closest to it more so than those far too cut off. And historically, we've seen that every time there's an industrial revolution, it always initially brings out disruption. It creates
Yeah.
a lot of problems, a lot of joblessness, a lot of reskilling and upskilling, and just more often than not, changes architectures, changes urban planning. We went from inherently a rural civilization to a city center civilization during the last industrial revolution. So there is that, right? There's the doomer scenario, which I would argue is very short to medium term. They're looking at 5 to 15 year horizon, and they're saying, this is going to create a lot of problems and a lot of mess. And they're also then talking about water scarcity and data centers taking in too much energy and therefore energy inflation and so on. Then there are those who are saying, just don't think about it, just focus on the innovation, and then the stuff will sort itself out. So these are the people who don't want to think about the philosophy, who just want to be closest to this evolution because they understand there is a lot of value to be generated here. And then there are the third sort of maximalists that are exclusively focusing on the long term. And the data that they're seeing is also very real, as real as the doomers. And they're basically saying that every time the industrial revolution comes, we get orders of magnitude of more growth annual than whatever we've ever dreamed of before that. And so, if we genuinely as a species want to equitably solve the problems that we face today, the only path towards that is by embracing this technological evolution, right? And there's a lot of data to support that. If you look at the annual GDP growth over the last 2,000 years, it's literally like it's a exponent curve, and people don't even realize we're looking at 2% per annum right now, but 500 years ago this was 2% a decade, and so we can very potentially see like 20% a year, which would be completely mind-boggling to our mind who's lived a 2% a year annual growth, right? If you look at all of these problems that are popping up in the short term, like water scarcity, AI and investment in energy allows for artificial water to be created infinitely, and therefore it solves that water problem, it solves agriculture and XYZ, all of that as well. So there is nuance to both sides. I do believe the timeline is where the problem lies. But within that context, then, what would your thoughts be of how to approach it? Because it does create a moral conundrum on some level.
Yeah.
I was literally seeing, I'll end this comment/question with this, but yesterday I saw a post on LinkedIn by this gentleman who works on autonomous AI and AI agents, and Pakistan recently just sort of inaugurated their first data centers, and he was like, he literally updated his profile picture and said against data centers in Pakistan, and he was like, oh, it takes so much water and Pakistan can't afford this. And there was this dichotomy right there where all you do is build AI agents, but then you don't want the data centers. And I get your thought process around the water, but there has to be more nuance to how we approach this argument, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Lots of different thoughts. So I think if I was going to structure it, right, like, so look, I think, so on the model side, like you know, we will soon reach, I think, the pinnacle or the peak of what simply scaling up um, text guessing transformers or LLMs will basically what can do. So they're going to hit a wall, and that's where you start to see the emergence. And there's already existing good conversation commentary about world models. And if anyone hasn't looked into world models, they definitely go look at that. Fei Li is a renowned thought leader in the space. Genie from the DeepMind team, definitely go have a look at that. But that's where we'll get into models that can understand actual physics, spatial logic, and like the dynamics of the world. And then we'll actually start to get into new breakthroughs in areas where AI is being applied to the real world. Second thing is, if you look at again like these LLMs, and you touched on this right at the start of, like, I think what does an edge of being like human first, or I think philosophy give you, is that you have to think. You actually have to think, right? And I think maybe in the world we live in, people don't think enough, sometimes myself included. But agents now are entering this realm where, yes, people can go in and give like a single shot, like a single prompt basically to an agent, and you get an instant output. But you're seeing the rise of deep thinking agents, where you're giving agents more time, compute power, to really internally simulate multiple options, break down the problem, test logic, simulate the different scenarios, and then give you an answer. So as humans, you need to be thinking about the same thing. That if you're presented with a problem, let me actually critically think about this and structure that accordingly. Third, I think be optimistic about the future. And that's honestly something that really inspires me personally about, Demis and the DeepMind team. You think of like, I think mainstream media will measure AI progression through improvements in chatbots or improvements in benchmarks. The real breakthroughs are things like AlphaFold, right? Which solved 3D protein structure prediction. And Demis has, and which is a massive like scientific and human breakthrough. And Demis has such amazing visions for how AGI can dramatically accelerate clean energy discovery. Accelerate clean energy, discover new raw materials, how you can kill complex diseases. And I think that's like what keeps me optimistic. Even though I'm in the space, I'm experiencing it, I'm seeing and hearing about all these challenges. I'm like, there's real problems that we need to solve for. And I think AI can help us do that. And I think the final thing is, we're in this precious window right now before AGI arrives. And this is where, as an individual, we need to be curious learners about the technology and how we can apply it. And if we are in positions of power, then we need to be making sure that we're, establishing the right guardrails on how AI is used, how it's governed, protocols, etc., so that the technology is released in a safe and secure way, and people have the chance to actually implement it. And again, I think it takes a lot of courage, right, for a leader of one of the world's biggest AI labs, Demis, again, at World Economic Forum in Davos, sitting next to his arguably maybe biggest competitor, but also compatriot in Dario, that he said, I'm prepared to go slower if it means the world can catch up. I think that takes a lot of courage. And I think each of us need to be approaching how we interact with models and how we distribute models and how we implement models in the same way. Like, yes, we're all focused on making the sale, driving the revenue, implementing, et cetera, but what are we doing that brings everybody on the journey and really powers the democratization access for intelligence?
And transition those disrupted to whatever alternates that are available. I do believe in the longer term horizon, whatever is disrupted, there will be far more created on top of that. And I think that transitionary period is really what we have to look at and see how we can lower the pain. Hashim, thank you so much for coming in, sharing all that insight. This was very, very exciting. Excited to meet you in New York sometime.
Yeah, likewise, please come through.
No, I shall. But thank you so much for taking the time out and
Thank
sharing
you
all
so
the
much.
insights.
No, what an honor. Thank you so much, Muzamil. I really appreciate your time as well. And it's been a really insightful conversation on this end as well.
I'm glad.
So appreciate it. Thank you.
And for all of you guys, let me know in the comment section below, particularly towards the end of the conversation, how are you approaching AI and the world that is going to be created after AI? Are you a doomer? Are you an absolute, maximalist, AI maximalist that is going to create a utopia where we no longer have to work and we forever live in a heavenly earth? What are your thoughts? Would love to hear in the comment section below. But nonetheless, it was Sayyid Muzamil Hassan Zedi. You were watching Thought Behind Things / Beyond the Bubble podcast powered by Nool Seed Studios. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.